What if the most advanced cold weather survival system ever created wasn't built with steel, insulation foam, or modern engineering, but with wood, hide, and fire? The blizzard arrives without mercy. Winds surge across the open plains like a living force, dragging sheets of ice through the air, each particle sharp enough to sting exposed skin within seconds. The cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's aggressive, invasive, turning breath into vapor and slowing every movement into a calculated risk. In these conditions, even modern systems begin to fail. Batteries drain without warning. Fabrics stiffen and lose flexibility. Vision collapses into a white void where distance and direction disappear. Out here, survival is not a long-term plan. It's a countdown. For most, that clock runs out fast, measured in hours, sometimes less. And yet, long before synthetic insulation or engineered gear, entire families lived through storms like this. Not once, but across generations. Not in fortified structures, not behind walls of steel or concrete, but inside something that, at first glance, feels almost impossibly fragile. A single conical shelter. A teepee. From a distance, it seems exposed, just poles and hide standing against overwhelming force. No weight, no rigidity, no obvious defense. But that first impression doesn't hold for long, because the closer you look, the more the illusion begins to break. And in its place, something far more unsettling and far more powerful begins to reveal itself. A system that doesn't just endure the storm, but understands it. At first glance, the teepee appears delicate. A cluster of poles bound together. A skin stretched thin across a simple frame. No rigid walls, no synthetic insulation, nothing that by modern standards should withstand a violent winter storm. But that first impression is deceptive, because the teepee is not fragile. It is adaptive. Its conical shape is not a matter of style, it is a product of function. When wind collides with the structure, it doesn't meet resistance. It is guided, redirected, allowed to move. Unlike flat surfaces that trap pressure and invite failure, the teepee's curved form disperses force upward and around, breaking the impact before it can build. Snow doesn't cling to it. It slides away, unable to gather weight. Wind doesn't slam into it. It flows across it, losing strength as it passes. Even the structure itself responds. It flexes subtly under stress, adjusting instead of cracking, absorbing energy rather than resisting it. This is not a shelter designed to overpower the environment. It is one designed to work with it. And within that quiet design choice lies the first real secret of survival. Not resistance, but alignment. The brilliance of the teepee lies in its geometry, not in decoration, not in materials, but in the invisible logic holding it all together. Each pole is placed with intent, forming a circular skeleton that shares the burden of stress across the entire structure. Nothing carries the load alone. Nothing fails in isolation. It begins with a tripod, 3 poles locked together to create a stable core. From there, additional poles are layered carefully, leaning into one another, building a frame that is both strong and responsive. A system designed not just to stand, but to adapt. And that flexibility changes everything. Because in extreme conditions, rigidity becomes a weakness. Structures that refuse to move eventually break. The teepee does the opposite. It yields just enough. As the wind intensifies, the frame doesn't collapse. It tightens. The pressure from the storm is redistributed through the poles, strengthening the overall structure rather than tearing it apart. What looks like vulnerability becomes resilience. Even the angle of each pole plays a role. They are often tilted slightly into the prevailing wind, transforming force into stability, turning impact into balance. This is not accidental design. It is learned precision. Long before formulas, before structural analysis, before modern engineering language existed, These principles were already understood, not through theory, but through generations of observation, failure, and survival. The result is something rare, a structure that doesn't just endure pressure, but responds to it. What transforms the teepee from a simple shelter into a true survival system isn't just what you see from the outside. It's what happens within. At the center, there is fire. Not a raging flame. Not something uncontrolled or wasteful, but a living, carefully managed source of heat, steady, deliberate, and precise. The fire pit itself is often set slightly below ground level, lined with stones that do more than hold shape. They absorb heat slowly, store it, and release it back into the space long after the flames have softened into embers. Above that fire, another system begins to work. The smoke flaps. At first glance, they seem simple, just openings at the top of the structure. But in reality, they function as adjustable controls, fine-tuning the internal environment with remarkable accuracy. When positioned correctly, they create a natural draft. Smoke is drawn upward and out, while fresh air is pulled in from below. The entire space begins to breathe. Warm air rises. Cool air feeds the flame. Smoke escapes without filling the interior. No fans, no machinery, no external systems. Just physics, understood and applied with precision. The result is a continuous cycle of airflow balanced, responsive, and self-regulating. Even as the storm rages outside, this internal system maintains clarity, warmth, and stability. It is, in every sense, a natural ventilation engine. One that adapts in real time to shifting wind, changing temperature, and the needs of those inside. And, perhaps most remarkable of all, it performs reliably in conditions where many modern systems would struggle to function at all. There is another secret one you won't notice from the outside. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't change the silhouette, but it changes everything about how the teepee works. The inner liner, suspended along the interior, set slightly away from the outer wall, it creates a narrow but powerful gap, an invisible layer of trapped air. And that air becomes insulation. Warmth from the central fire doesn't rush outward and disappear. It lingers. It circulates. It is held within that space, slowed down before it can escape. At the same time, the cold air outside is stopped from pushing directly inward. It loses momentum before it ever reaches the living space. It's a simple idea, but one that defines the entire environment inside. Modern buildings use this same principle. Double walls, thermal glass, insulated panels. But here, it's achieved with nothing more than natural materials. Hide, woven fabric, air. Layer by layer, the teepee becomes more than shelter. It becomes a controlled climate system. Heat is retained. Airflow is guided. The interior stabilizes even as the outside world turns hostile. And then, something unexpected joins the system. Snow, what most would see as a threat, becomes an ally. Packed carefully around the base, it seals every gap. It blocks low drafts that would otherwise creep across the floor. It reinforces the barrier between inside and out. Cold, frozen water, repurposed into protection. The result is remarkable. A structure that uses its environment, not just to survive it, but to strengthen itself because of it. Inside the teepee, the storm doesn't disappear, but it transforms. What was once a violent roar becomes a distant, muffled presence. The chaos outside softens into a low, constant rhythm. Movement slows. The air, once cutting and hostile, begins to hold warmth. Space itself feels different. Contained. Controlled. Families gather close to the fire, seated on thick layers of furs, arranged with intention. These layers don't just provide comfort, they trap heat close to the ground, where it matters most. The circular design of the tepi brings everyone inward. No corners. No cold edges. No one left far from the center of warmth. And within that space, every detail is placed with purpose. Food is stored along the perimeter, where temperatures stay cool enough to preserve it, yet protected from freezing solid. Tools are arranged within reach, ready without the need for unnecessary movement. Clothing is hung or laid near the fire overnight, dried carefully so it remains flexible, usable alive with warmth by morning. Even rest is strategic. Bedding is layered to hold body heat, creating pockets of warmth that last through the coldest hours. The fire is not extinguished, it is reduced, controlled, its embers covered in ash, to preserve heat until dawn. Nothing inside this space is accidental. Every action, every placement, every routine has been tested, refined, and repeated across generations. Because here, survival is not about reacting in panic. It is about preparation, about rhythm, about understanding the environment so deeply that even in the heart of a storm, life continues with intention. Managing fire inside an enclosed space is not instinct. It is knowledge, earned and refined over time. Because here, every flame carries consequence. Too much fuel, and the air thickens. Smoke lingers, rising too slowly, turning warmth into danger. Too little, and the fire weakens. Heat fades, and the cold begins to settle in, quiet but relentless. Between those extremes lies a narrow balance, one that must be maintained with precision. Different woods are chosen with purpose. Dense hardwoods burn slowly, releasing steady, reliable heat. Lighter materials catch quickly, used to awaken the fire when it begins to fall. Even natural elements, resin, fat, bark, are used carefully, not to increase size, but to improve efficiency. Because the goal is not a larger fire, it is a smarter one. The fire is not simply fed, it is managed. It rises and settles. It responds to air, to fuel, to the subtle shifts inside the space. In a way, it breathes. And those who tend it come to understand that rhythm, not as a task, but as a relationship. One that is taught, observed, and passed on. Because in this environment, fire is not comfort. It is survival itself. Survival begins long before the first snow ever touches the ground. Long before the wind rises. Long before the sky turns white. Because in environments like this, what you do before the storm matters far more than what you do during it. And it starts with location. A tepi is never placed by chance. Every position is chosen with care, sheltered behind hills, tree lines, or natural formations that break the force of the wind. The ground is slightly elevated, allowing meltwater to drain away instead of pooling beneath the structure. And the entrance is turned away from prevailing winds, reducing exposure and protecting the interior from sudden drafts. Then comes preparation. Wood is gathered in advance, enough to last through days of confinement. Hides are checked, poles are secured, bindings are tightened. Supplies are arranged with intention, ready to be used without wasted movement. So when the storm finally arrives, there is no panic, only action. Inside, life shifts into a quieter rhythm. Movement becomes measured. Energy is conserved. Every task is done with purpose. Because the storm is not something to fight, it is something to prepare for. And in that mindset, everything changes. There is one element you cannot see, and yet, it may be the most important of all. Calm. Inside the teepee, control doesn't come from stopping the storm. It comes from understanding your place within it. The sound outside softens into a distant, steady presence. The space inside feels defined, contained. Firelight flickers gently, creating a stable world of warmth and shadow. That stability is more than comfort. It is survival. Because fear disrupts judgment. Panic wastes energy. And in extreme conditions, even small mistakes can become irreversible. But here, something different takes hold. There is rhythm. Stories are shared. Hands stay busy repairing tools, preparing what comes next. Knowledge moves quietly from one generation to another. The storm continues, but it no longer dominates. It fades into the background. And in that shift from chaos to understanding, survival is no longer temporary. It becomes sustainable. When the storm finally passes, the Tipi is still there. Not shattered, not buried, not defeated. Standing quiet, unchanged, as if it had been part of the storm itself. And that's the truth most people miss. It didn't survive because it resisted the wind. It survived because it understood it. It didn't block the cold completely. It learned how to manage it, how to reduce it, redirect it, live within it. That is the final secret. The teepee is more than a shelter. It is a philosophy shaped by generations who observed the land instead of trying to dominate it. Every detail reflects that mindset. Adaptation over resistance, balance over force, respect over control. And in that, it reveals something modern survival often overlooks. Strength is not always found in thicker walls or stronger materials. Sometimes, real strength comes from flexibility, from awareness, from knowing when to yield and how to respond. So maybe the question isn't how we can build more powerful systems. Maybe the real question is this. In a world where we try to control everything, what would happen if we chose to understand instead? If this story changed the way you see survival, if it made you pause and rethink what true resilience looks like, then you're already part of the journey. On Shadow, we explore the forgotten intelligence of the past, the systems, the minds, and the quiet innovations that shaped human survival long before modern technology. Stay with us, because the greatest designs in history weren't built to dominate nature. They were built to live within it.